I never imagined that the woman who once begged me to accept her into our family would one day spit a word so cruel it would shake the foundation of everything I had built for my son. It happened on an ordinary Sunday afternoon, one of those quiet days when you expect nothing more than tea, small talk, and a little laughter. Instead, it became the day I realized respect is more valuable than blood, and silence can be more dangerous than anger. Before I go on, if you're listening to this in a quiet place or during a moment when you need to think, please subscribe to the channel and leave a comment telling me where you're listening from. It helps me know I'm not telling this story alone. Now, let me tell you why everything began. My name is Harold. I'm 68 years old, retired, grey at the temples, slow on the stairs, but still sharp enough to know when something precious is being disrespected. My wife, Margaret, and I have been married for 46 years. She is not loud, she is not flashy, she does not demand attention when she enters a room, but she is the kind of woman who remembers birthdays no one else does, who folds towels neatly even when no one is watching, and who says thank you to waiters like their family. For 20 years, Margaret worked as a cleaner. Office buildings, schools, hospital hallways at dawn while the world was still asleep. She wore gloves that cracked her skin in winter. She scrubbed floors people walked over without noticing. And every evening, she came home smelling faintly of disinfectant and exhaustion, yet she still cooked dinner, still asked me about my day, still smiled like she hadn't spent 8 hours invisible. I was a mechanic for most of my life. Between us, we raised our only son, Daniel, on honest money and tired hands. We taught him one thing above all else: never look down on honest work. Or so I thought. Daniel married Olivia 6 years ago. She was polished, educated, confident, the kind of woman who spoke quickly and smiled strategically. Margaret and I welcomed her with open arms. We paid for half the wedding. We gifted them a down payment for their house. And when interest rates climbed years later, I quietly stepped in and covered their mortgage payments. Daniel never asked. I just did it. Because that's what fathers do when they can. Every month, like clockwork, the payment left my account and went to their home, the same home where my wife would soon be reduced to a single ugly word. That Sunday, Margaret insisted on helping Olivia in the kitchen. I'll wash the dishes, she said gently, rolling up her sleeves like she had done thousands of times before. Olivia glanced at her, then laughed, sharp, careless, unthinking. Oh no, don't worry, she said loudly, not lowering her voice. I mean, you're basically a cleaner anyway, right? The room went silent. The clock ticked, a fork clinked against a plate. I watched Margaret freeze, her hands hovering over the sink, water still running. She smiled, because that's what she always does when she's hurt. Oh, she said softly, old habits. Daniel laughed. That was the moment something inside me cracked. Not because of Olivia's words, but because of my son's silence. I didn't shout, I didn't stand up, I didn't embarrass anyone at the table. I just watched. I watched my wife dry her hands and quietly sit back down. I watched her eyes lose their light. I watched my son continue eating as if nothing had happened. And I realized something chilling. They were living comfortably in a house built on money earned by the hands they now mocked. That night, Margaret said nothing. She never does. But I noticed she folded the laundry slower. I noticed she avoided her reflection. I noticed she apologized to me for making things awkward. That was when I opened my laptop. I logged into my bank account. And I stared at the scheduled mortgage payment set to go out the next morning. My finger hovered over the mouse. 46 years of marriage. A lifetime of dignity. One word spoken too casually. I didn't feel anger. I felt clarity. And I clicked cancel. That was only the beginning. The next morning, I woke up before the sun. Margaret was still asleep beside me, her breathing soft and uneven the way it gets when her arthritis acts up. I lay there staring at the ceiling, listening to the distant hum of traffic, wondering how one careless sentence could echo so loudly in my chest. At 8:17 a.m., my phone rang. I didn't need to look at the screen to know it was Daniel. I let it ring twice before answering. Dad, his voice was tight, controlled, the way it used to sound when he was a teenager caught in a lie. There's a problem with the mortgage, the payment didn't go through. I said nothing. Dad, he repeated, sharper this time, the bank called Olivia. They said the payment was cancelled. Yes, I replied calmly, I cancelled it. Silence. I could almost picture him standing in his kitchen, phone pressed to his ear, brows furrowed, mind scrambling for an explanation that didn't involve consequences. Why would you do that? He asked finally. I waited. Not because I was trying to punish him, but because I wanted him to feel the space where his apology should have been. Dad, this isn't funny, he continued. You know we depend on that help. The rate went up. We talked about this. No, I said evenly. You talked, I listened. There's a difference. He exhaled hard. What's this really about? I looked over at Margaret, who had woken up and was pretending not to listen. Her eyes were fixed on the window, her face calm, but her hands were clenched beneath the blanket. This is about respect, I said, and how easily it's forgotten when comfort becomes normal. Daniel scoffed. Respect, Dad, come on. Olivia didn't mean anything by that word, I interrupted. My voice didn't rise, but it sharpened. She didn't mean anything by that word because she's never had to live inside it. He paused. Then came the sentence that told me everything. You're overreacting. I closed my eyes. Daniel, I said quietly, your mother spent 20 years cleaning buildings so you could walk into classrooms with clean shoes and a full stomach, and you laughed when she was reduced to a punchline. She was joking, he insisted. Mom didn't even say anything. No, I said, she didn't. That's how I know how deep it cut. Another silence. This one heavier. So what, he said finally, irritation creeping in. You're holding our house hostage now. No, I replied. I'm simply no longer paying for a place where my wife isn't respected. The line went dead. Olivia called next. She didn't bother with greetings. Harold, she said sharply, there must be some mistake. The payment. There was no mistake, I said. You can't just stop paying without warning, she snapped. We have a budget, we have responsibilities. I almost laughed. You mean like the responsibility to treat people with dignity? She huffed. This again. I already told Daniel it was just a joke. People are so sensitive these days. I felt something cold settle in my chest. Olivia, I said slowly, have you ever scrubbed someone else's mess off a bathroom floor at 5 in the morning? What does that have to do with? Have you ever had strangers look through you like you don't exist? She didn't answer. My wife has, I continued, and she never once complained, but yesterday in your house, she was reminded that to some people she's still just the help. That's not what I meant, Olivia said, her tone softening slightly, but not enough. What you meant doesn't matter, I replied. What you revealed does. There was a pause, then irritation again. So you're really doing this, she asked, over one comment. No, I said, over years of quiet entitlement. She laughed bitterly. Fine, I'll apologize if that's what you want. I shook my head, though she couldn't see it. An apology given to restore comfort is not the same as one given to restore dignity. She hung up on me. That evening, Margaret finally spoke. I wish you hadn't done that, she said softly as we sat at the dinner table. I looked at her. Why? I don't want to be the reason you and Daniel fight. I reached across the table and took her hands, the same hands that had cracked and bled and still found time to braid our son's hair when he was small. You're not the reason, I said gently. You're the reminder. Her eyes filled, but she smiled. I don't need money to feel valued, she whispered. I know, I said, but sometimes other people do. 2 weeks passed. No calls, no visits. Then came the letter from the bank. Late notice, penalty warning. I placed it on the kitchen counter and waited. On the 15th day, Daniel showed up at our door. He looked tired, older, like someone who had just discovered that adulthood doesn't come with guarantees. Dad, he said quietly, can we talk? I stepped aside and let him in. Margaret stayed seated. This time, he noticed. That was when the real conversation began. Daniel didn't sit right away. He stood there in the living room like a guest who wasn't sure he was still welcome, hands in his pockets, eyes drifting from the old family photos on the wall to the carpet beneath his feet. This house had raised him, taught him how to walk, how to apologize, how to say thank you. Yet somehow, he'd forgotten all of it. I didn't come to argue, he said finally. Margaret nodded politely, but didn't speak. I gestured toward the armchair. Then sit, arguments don't stand, conversations do. He sat. For a moment, no one spoke. The silence felt thick, but this time it wasn't uncomfortable, it was necessary. I didn't realize how bad things had gotten, Daniel said, rubbing his palms together. With money, with stress. Oliver's been anxious. I guess we both have. Margaret looked up then. That doesn't excuse cruelty, she said quietly. Daniel flinched, not because her voice was loud, but because it was. I know, he said quickly, I'm not saying it does. I leaned back in my chair and studied him. Then say what you are saying. He swallowed. I should have stopped it. When she said that, I should have said something. Yes, Margaret replied, you should have. The words landed hover than any lecture I could have given. I didn't laugh because I agreed, Daniel continued. I laughed because I didn't know what else to do. That, I said, is how harm survives, not because of villains, but because of spectators. Daniel lowered his head. I'm sorry, Mom. Margaret watched him for a long moment, her eyes searching his face, not for regret, but for understanding. Do you know why it hurt? She asked. Because it was disrespectful, he offered. She shook her head gently. Because it erased me, she said. In one sentence, everything I was became a uniform, a label, not a mother, not a wife, just a job. Daniel's jaw tightened. I never thought of it that way. I know, she replied. That's why I'm saying it now. The front door opened. Oliver stepped inside without knocking. She looked different, less polished. Her hair pulled back hastily, eyes shadowed with exhaustion. She stopped short when she saw Margaret sitting there. Oh, she said, I didn't realize you were having a family meeting. Margaret didn't rise, didn't smile. She just looked at Oliver. You can sit, I said calmly, if you're here to listen. Oliver bristled. I came because the bank is threatening foreclosure, Harold. This has gone far enough. Daniel shot her a warning look. Oliver, please. No, she said, turning to him. I'm tired of tiptoeing. We didn't ask your parents to carry us forever. I raised an eyebrow, and yet you accepted it every month without protest. That doesn't mean you get to control us, she snapped. I'm not controlling you, I replied. I'm withdrawing support. She crossed her arms over a joke. Margaret stood then. The room went still. I'd like to say something, she said. Oliver hesitated, then nodded. I cleaned for 20 years, Margaret began. I cleaned things people were ashamed of, messes they pretended weren't theirs, and I did it with my head held high because that work fed my child. She looked at Daniel, then back at Oliver. When you called me the cleaner, you didn't insult my job, you insulted my worth. Oliver opened her mouth. Mugrat raised a hand. I'm not finished. Oliver closed it. I don't need your apology, Mugrat continued. I need your awareness, because someday when life humbles you, and it will, you'll want grace from people you once overlooked. Oliver's eyes flickered. You think I look down on you, she said defensively. I worked hard to get where I am. So did I, Mugrat replied, just in different shoes. Silence. Then Oliver's shoulders sagged. I didn't mean to erase you, she said quietly, but I see now that I did. Daniel exhaled in relief. I remained still. Words matter, I said, but change matters more. Oliver nodded slowly. What do you want from us? I looked at Mugrat. She spoke first. Respect, she said, not when you need help, not when you're desperate, always. Oliver swallowed. And the mortgage? I folded my hands. That depends, I said, on what you do next. That night after they left, Mugrat sat beside me on the couch. Do you think they'll change? She asked softly. I don't know, I replied, but they'll never forget. She leaned her head on my shoulder. For the first time, she said, I didn't feel invisible. I kissed the top of her head. And you never will again. The apology didn't come right away. That's how I knew it might be real. 3 days passed after that conversation. No calls, no messages, no carefully worded texts trying to smooth things over. Mugrat went about her routine as she always had, watering the plants in the morning, folding towels with practiced care, humming softly to herself while she cooked. But I could tell something inside her had shifted. She stood a little straighter. She spoke a little clearer. Respect, once tasted, is hard to forget. The 4th day, Mugrat received a phone call. It wasn't from Daniel. It was from Oliver. I was hoping we could talk, Oliver said, her voice quieter than usual. Mugrat glanced at me before answering, You may. They met later that afternoon at a small cafe near our home. I didn't go. Some reckonings must happen without witnesses. When Mugrat returned 2 hours later, she didn't say much, just set her purse down, removed her coat, and sat beside me. She cried, Mugrat said finally. I nodded. Did you believe her? Yes, she replied, because she didn't cry for herself. Later that evening, Daniel showed up again. This time, he carried a folded piece of paper. I resigned, he said. Mugrat and I looked at each other. From my firm, he explained. They were pushing me to cut corners, inflate numbers. It paid well, but it wasn't honest. I kept telling myself it was temporary. I studied him, and now I realize I've been standing on a lot of things that weren't solid, he said, including your help. He handed me the paper. It was a job offer. Maintenance supervisor, modest pay, honest work. I smiled, not because of the position, but because of the humility. Why show this to me? I asked. Because, he said, if I'm asking for help, it shouldn't be without effort. Mugrat reached out and squeezed his hand. I'm proud of you, she said. His eyes filled. 2 weeks later, Oliver invited us to dinner. She cooked. Everything. No catering, no shortcuts. When Mugrat stood to clear the table, Oliver stopped her gently. Please, she said, sit, you're our guest. Mugrat hesitated. Then sat. Oliver brought out dessert, and with it, an envelope. Inside was a handwritten letter. I volunteered, Oliver said quietly, at the community center, night shifts, cleaning, childcare, whatever they need. Mugrat looked up, surprised. I wanted to understand, Oliver continued, not just apologize. I watched my wife's eyes soften. Understanding, Mugrat said, changes everything. A month passed. Then another. Daniel paid part of the mortgage himself, the rest waited. One evening, he came to me and placed a check on the table. "It's not much," he said, "but it's ours." I slid it back to him. "Keep it," I said. "You'll need it more than I will." He frowned. "Does that mean?" "It means," I interrupted, "you're no longer dependent." That night, Margaret and I sat on the porch, watching the sun dip low. "Do you regret canceling the payments?" she asked. "No," I said. "I regret that it took pain to teach what love should have taught freely." She smiled. "Sometimes," she said, "love needs a backbone." I laughed softly. "You're right." The day the bank letter arrived again, it felt different. Not threatening this time. Final. Daniel brought it over himself. He didn't open it right away. He placed it on the table between Margaret and me as if it was something fragile, something that could either break us or bind us for good. "They're giving us one last window," he said, 30 days. Margaret folded her hands. "And what do you want to do?" He looked at her, really looked at her, the way a grown man looks at the woman who raised him, not as background, not as habit, but as history. "I want to stand on my own," he said, "even if it's hard." Olivia nodded. "So do I." That was the first time she said "I" without leaning on you. 2 weeks later, Daniel and Olivia sold the house. Not because they were forced. Because they chose to. They moved into a smaller place closer to Daniel's new job. Less space, more effort, fewer comforts, more conversations. On moving day, Olivia handed Margaret a box. Inside were cleaning gloves. New ones. Still sealed. "I keep these," Olivia said softly, "to remind myself never to look down again." Margaret smiled, not sadly, not proudly, but peacefully. That evening, Daniel asked me to walk with him. We strolled down the block, slow and quiet. "I used to think providing was about money," he said, "but I was wrong." I nodded. "Money supports life, values build it." He stopped walking. "Will you ever help again?" he asked. I met his eyes. "If help becomes a bridge, yes," I said. "If it becomes a crutch, no." He smiled. "That's fair." A month later, we gathered as a family at a community center banquet. Margaret had been invited. They were honoring longtime volunteers. When her name was called, she froze. "I didn't sign up for this," she whispered. I squeezed her hand. "You already did, years ago." She walked onto that stage in a simple dress, applause rising around her, not for what she cleaned, but for who she was. Olivia stood first. Daniel followed. I stood last. Margaret's eyes searched the room, then found me. And in that moment, the word cleaner lost all its power. Later that night, back home, Margaret leaned against me. "Thank you," she said. "For what?" "For seeing me," she replied. I kissed her forehead. "I always have." Some people think canceling the mortgage was about punishment. It was. It was about refusing to fund disrespect. It was about teaching my son that dignity is not inherited, it's practiced. And that the strongest homes are built not on money, but on honor. Please tap like to support, subscribe so you don't miss the next stories, and share it if you think someone else needs to hear this. Thank you for listening all the way through. Your presence is what gives stories like this